Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's Planning Applications Committee meeting. Item 1 is the evacuation procedures, which I shall read, as I know we've got a number of people who are here attending for the first time. So I ask that you ensure that you are all signed in on the sign-in sheet provided. These will be used in the case of an evacuation. A fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs and do not use the lifts. Once out of the building, please gather outside the Lloyds Bank building on the opposite side of the road. Exit by the door by which you entered the room or by the fire exits, which are clearly indicated by the standard green fire exit signs. If you need any assistance in evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of staff. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded for future publication on the council website. However, I'm led to believe, although it's being recorded, there is an issue with YouTube, so it will have to go up later on. So anyone at home that's trying to watch, my apologies for that. It's something that's beyond our technical control. Item 2, apologies. I have 2 apologies, one from Councillor Pandare and one from Councillor Wilson. Okay, item 3, the minutes. So the minutes from the last meeting, hopefully you've had a chance to look through them. Are members happy for me to sign those minutes off as a true and accurate record of the last meeting? Okay, I'm seeing no dissent, so I shall sign those minutes off. Item number 4, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest? No. Item number 5, declarations of contact. Do any members have any declarations of contact? Okay, no, not seeing any. Okay, so that brings us on then to our one and only item this evening. So I'll hand on to Karina, who will now begin that item.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, this application is a hybrid planning application comprising an outline application for development of distribution and industrial buildings, B2 and B8 use, including ancillary offices, earthworks, green infrastructure and landscaping, and the demolition of existing buildings, all matters reserved except access, and a full application for the development of a distribution building, use class B8, which relates to Unit 1, including ancillary offices with associated access, hard standing, parking, earthworks and landscaping at Padge Hall Farm, Watling Street, Hinckley. The application is a cross-boundary application with Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council and Rugby Borough Council. The application relates to EIA development. The slide being displayed shows the administrative boundaries of each local authority in pink. The image on the right-hand side shows the approximate area of development falling within the council's administrative boundary circled in red. The application has been called in by Councillor Christopher Wilson on grounds that the development relates to strategic development which would have impacts upon the borough. Additionally, the application has also received a level of neighbour representation in the form of both objection and support, which would both trigger the application to be decided at committee. Further to this, the application relates to EIA development, which is a further trigger for the Planning Committee to assess the application. The application was taken to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Applications Committee on the 15th of March 2023, where members resolved to grant permission. The full application site comprises approximately 64 hectares of land located on the eastern edge of Nuneaton, adjoining and immediately to the southwest of the A5. The southern boundary of the site is defined by the Birmingham to Leicester rail line. To the west of the application site lies the urban area of Nuneaton and includes the A47, which connects through to the A5 to the north of the site. The site is surrounded by agricultural fields to the west, and Harrow Brook extends through the site on the northern and western sides of the site. A minor part of the site, which is not located within the council's boundary, is located within the West Midlands Greenbelt. The application site is gently sloping, with the vast majority of the site falling from southeast to northwest, with a very gentle fall inland from the farm towards the eastern corner of the site. The context of the site includes industrial and commercial development immediately beyond the A5 and the northeastern boundary of the site. The area of the site located within the council's boundary is separated from the rear gardens of the Longshoot by a number of open fields which range from around 50 metres away to over 170 metres away. The images shown on the screen now are views of the existing site from various vantage points. The image being displayed on screen now shows the physical separation distances plan, which shows the distance from the proposed development, employment development and neighbouring properties. It should be noted that the access in some of the proposed development is located within Hinckley's administrative area, apologies for that, whilst Rugby would accommodate the largest part of the proposed development. The element of the application located within MBBC's boundary is modest considering the scale of the whole proposal and features no proposed built form based on the illustrative details submitted to support the application. The part of the site located within the council's boundary would comprise of soft landscaping and habitat creation, which would be located up to and along the Harrow Brook, which forms the boundary of the borough. The element located within the council's administrative boundary is in outline form only, with all matters reserved for approval at a later date. The outline permission sought is for the demolition of existing structures and the erection of distribution and industrial buildings falling within use classes B2 and B8. Layout, landscaping, scale, and appearance are all reserved matters to be considered in detail at a later stage. A parameters plan has been submitted relating to units 2 to 4, although it should be noted that the 4 units shown on the plans are illustrative and it is not known how many units would come forward throughout the remainder of the site at the reserved matters stages. The application seeks approval for 63.8 hectares of employment development. However, the developed area of the site across the 5 units, which based on the illustrative details submitted, equates to just over half the site. Landscape buffers surrounding the site equate to approximately 49% of the entire site. Landscape mounds and screening are also proposed to screen the development. Over 10,000 new native trees and woodland plants would be planted, and over 25,000 new other plants would be planted. In relation to the principle of development, the site is located within the countryside. However, the application proposes trees, scrub and other habitats to the northern side of the Harrow Brook, as well as trees and planting as shown on the illustrative details. The scheme, whilst would facilitate the wider development, would ensure that the site remains as an open and undeveloped site and therefore no conflict has been identified with the provisions of Policy DS3 of the Borough Plan 2019. Section 1 of the committee report discusses other matters relating to the loss of agricultural land and the wider impacts of the scheme in relation to the economic, social and environmental benefits, and the principle of development has been found to be acceptable. The plan displayed on the screen now is the submitted illustrative landscape and green infrastructure plan. The image shown on the screen now provides an indication as to the visual impacts of the proposed development, with a viewpoint plan provided in the top right-hand corner of the screen. The committee report discusses the impacts when having regard to visual amenity and landscape character. The development would result in the urbanisation of the site, which would result in a high magnitude of landscape change. The application proposes mitigation mounding with proposed woodland, tree, planting and scrub. Illustrative landscape cross-sections have been submitted to support the application, which are being displayed on the screen now to show the relationship between the proposed scheme, landscaping and proposed mounding. When concentrating on the mounding proposed closest to the Longshoot and adjacent to the Harrow Brook, the scheme proposes to increase the existing ground levels by between 7 and 9 metres above the existing levels, depending on which part of the site the measurements are taken from. Should be noted that these details are illustrative at this stage owing to the hybrid nature of the application, and the heights provided are approximate and exclude the height of the proposed planting. It should be noted that the scale of the development is considerable and will still be visible post 15 years after the construction and establishment of the landscape planting, and there will be therefore a moderate major adverse landscape effect. It should be recognised that the proposed mitigation mounding and landscape screening would be located within neighbouring authorities. As such, the council would not be the decision maker in the event of a reserve matters planning application relating to landscaping of land adjoining our boundary. The local planning authority have, however, confirmed with the planning case officer for the application at Rugby Borough Council that Rugby Borough Council intend for this council to be consulted on any reserve matters application or discharge of condition application submitted by the applicant. This will ensure that the views of MBBC's planning department are considered as part of the decision making. In terms of the ecological impacts, the results of the ecological appraisal are considered to be acceptable. The proposed development would not give rise to detrimental and adverse impacts at statutory or non-statutory ecological sites. The proposal would result in a net gain of biodiversity. The potential impact on species would be mitigated against through the use of planning conditions. It is therefore considered that the proposed development would not have an adverse impact upon habitats and species, whilst ensuring a net biodiversity gain. The image being displayed on the screen now shows the habitat creation plan. The images shown on site are the noise contours at night and day. Consideration has been given to the impacts of the scheme upon amenities of neighbouring occupiers in section 6 of the committee report. Objections have also been received from nearby occupiers relating to the proposed development as set out in detail within the report. Matters to include noise, lighting, vibration and overbearing impacts are all assessed. For the reasons set out within section 6 of the report, it is not considered that the application could be resisted on the basis of its impacts upon residential amenities. In terms of archaeology and heritage, these matters are discussed within section 7 of the committee report. There are no heritage concerns subject to the imposition of conditions. Section 3 of the committee report addresses the highway safety and off-site highways works and parking impacts. There are no objections from National Highways, Warwickshire County Council or Leicestershire County Council, subject to conditions and obligations which would be addressed by Hinckley and Rugby as necessary. Given the scope of the proposal and the lack of development and built form proposed within the borough boundary, it is not considered that there will be any severe detrimental harm to highway safety as a result of the approval, and it is not considered that the application could be resisted on any highway safety grounds. With regard to flood risk, Warwickshire County Council flood risk team have been consulted on the application and have raised no objection to the application, subject to this, the imposition of conditions relating to surface water drainage, a scheme for surface water drainage to be submitted and agreed in writing by the council. Similarly, the Environment Agency also raised no objection to the scheme, subject to the imposition of a condition to ensure the development is carried out in accordance with the submitted flood risk assessment and the mitigation it details. Got a bit of an IT issue, IT person, it's not flicking through the slides. Apologies, the slideshow's not passing this point. Not very much. Apologies, the rest of the photographs are actually provided within the agenda at the back. So if you turn to the elevations and plans relating to Unit 1, which are the last few slides, that should provide you with the images that would have been displayed on the screen in any case. Chair, are you happy for me to continue the presentation in the absence of the
Yeah, please. I think
the
we've
digital?
got through most of the presentation.
Great.
So, yes.
Can I just ask, are we looking at page 56 onwards?
Yeah, that's right. Page 56 onwards, and that should show you everything that would have been displayed on the screen in any case. It's recognised that the application relates to a cross-boundary application which straddles 3 separate authorities. Under usual circumstances, all authorities affected by the proposal would be party to any Section 106 legal agreement. However, in this particular case, the Council have sought legal advice from the Council's legal team, who have confirmed that when having regard to the circumstances of the application, the Council would not look to be party to any Section 106 legal agreement entered into. It is advised that restrictions or controls required on the land could be successfully secured adequately through the imposition of appropriately worded planning conditions, given the changes proposed within the council's boundary would result in no requirement for additional infrastructure and would result in no additional built form. In conclusion, when having regard to the scale and nature of the proposed works, which would be carried out within the council's boundary, together with the relevant provisions of the development plan as summarised in the report, as well as the consultation responses received, it is considered that subject to compliance with the conditions attached to any permission granted, the proposed development would be acceptable in principle, would be in accordance with the development plan, would not materially harm the character or appearance of the area or the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers, and would be acceptable in terms of landscape impacts, highway safety, landscaping, flood risk, heritage, archaeology, ecology and biodiversity net gain. There are no material plan considerations which indicate the application should be assessed other than in accordance with the development plan, and it is therefore recommended that the application be granted subject to the imposition of conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I've got a couple of speakers on this, so I'm going to go to the first one, which is and that's Councillor Tromans as Ward Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I have my fellow councillor for St Nicholas Ward, Councillor Jeff Clark, with me today. We accept and understand that for a whole bunch of reasons there isn't an opportunity to resist this application. And so, we should focus on what we can do and what will mitigate the impact of this for our residents, because there is some really constructive stuff that I think we can do. There's 4 things. First of all, when I looked at this online, although we weren't able to see it on the screen, there are lighting splay kind of simulations on how far the light, I believe, would spread. That's great. And it's fine to have that in the plans, but it's funny that when these artists' impressions become reality and they're actually done by subcontractors, they may not have the kind of lighting that is focused down, and instead the light may reach much further and cause meaningful disruption. Bearing in mind this will operate 24/7, might cause meaningful disruption to neighbours. So I think we should certainly be, if we can't condition it, requesting and saying that we expect them to deliver on what they've said in terms of the lighting and the light pollution that comes from that. So lighting should be focused down onto the sites. Second is sound. We've seen in all of the artist's impression again that the loading bays and the yards and all the rest of it are all facing the east, so they're all away from the long shoot back gardens. The long shoot back gardens are screened by the buildings themselves. So here's the long shoot, here's the buildings, and then the yards are actually the other side. So people won't really hear and see the lorries at all. And the bunds, the mounds that the officer was talking about, that should screen it as well. It's one thing to show that in an artist's impression, but again, we know as a planning committee that when things actually get built out, it's funny that they don't look like that on the ground. Again, I think that's something that we should be asking to be kept, and that we should, when it comes to reserve matters, that should be what the council's response is. Third is the planting. I don't suppose there's any chance of semi-mature trees. We've heard that it will have a meaningful impact on the visual amenity for 15 years. Well, part of the way to mitigate against that is to have semi-mature trees from day one, or at least on the bits that are screening residents' back gardens, because that there is a cost to that, but I think it's only a fair and reasonable one. We want to minimise the impact, any detriment on residents where we can. The fourth and final point is a footpath from the Longshoot Public House up the southern side of the Watling Street, just to join up that 20-30 metre gap to where the bus stop is. So that's the first bit that we should really be done as part of the connectivity of the whole site. I would imagine that their objectives should include that. And as a secondary part, there's also a gap of about 20 metres from the bus stop going round Dodwell's Island before the footpath magically reappears on there. To not join up that 20 metres when you're going to have a lot of people walking and catching the bus to the new site, as I say, it must meet the developers' connectivity targets and all the rest of it to do that little bit of work. The land's there, I'm sure County Highways will make it available. It's just the cost of paving a couple of 20 metre strips. And I think that will, in the long term, make quite a significant difference to the connectivity of the and help local people to work there, and also benefit the wider public in terms of being able to use that bus stop more safely. Thank you, Chair.
Does anyone have any points of clarification they would like to ask? Councillor Cape.
One at a time.
Can you just make sure
It is
there are not further questions?
It is a clarification.
There is a difference there.
I got a little bit confused because I'm not aware of what the plans are for the A5.
I got to
Sorry,
say,
no.
If it's not, we'll come to that bit later on. Councillor Hammersley.
A distance from the bottom of the rear gardens to the buildings themselves. That distance, I'm not sure. I haven't seen it anywhere. It's probably me.
So in terms of the distances from the long shoot, so whether that be the properties themselves or the rear gardens, that element of the scheme, other than Unit 1, is in outline form. So the layout, the precise location of any units is not known at this stage, but obviously, you know, we can already sort of ascertain the site location is so far away from the scheme. I think we did display some of the separation distances. Are we able to get the PowerPoint back up so we can show the separation distances, please? Yeah, we're having IT issues. So page 53 of the agenda shows the separation, but you do have to bear in mind that this application for that element of the site is outline, and so we can't confirm at this point. That would be subject to later reserved matters applications.
From the edge of the road, or is it from the bottom of gardens?
Maria, what page is that? Page 53. Let me have a look at that.
Bottom of garden.
Yeah. It's the bottom of the gardens on page 53.
Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cape.
So can I ask a
So that's all we're clarifying. We could come back to other points when we go to our discussion, but it's just if there's anything you want to clarify from the speaker, that's all I'm sort of looking at the moment. So I can see no other points of clarification. So I'll go to our second speaker, and that's Mr. Harley, who represents the agent. So you have your 3 minutes when you're ready, Mr. Harley.
I appreciate this is an unusual application, with the site mostly being in Rugby Borough and with no built development or infrastructure proposed within the MBBC area. For context, as you've heard, almost 50%, some 31 hectares of the total application area, is proposed as green infrastructure, landscaping and habitat creation, with over 10,000 trees and other planting proposed on site. And that extensive new green space includes the land within Nuneaton and Bedworth along the corridor of the Harrow Brook, and you've seen some useful plans in the presentation. The proposed future employment buildings will be well over 200 metres from the nearest properties, as we've just discussed, separated by retained agricultural land and a new landscaped earthwork bund, which will help minimise visual and other potential effects. Planning conditions requiring agreement of additional details will give the councils future opportunities to review and inform development of the site in due course. As is made clear in the report, there are no outstanding objections from any statutory consultees, including, for example, with regard to noise, visual impacts, drainage and flood risk or ecology. Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee unanimously approved the application last week, and it's before Hinckley and Bosworth's committee tonight, actually, in about half an hour, recommended for approval there too. The proposals are supported by National Highways and both Warwickshire and Leicestershire County Highways, following a rigorous assessment of the scheme and its likely impacts. The development will solve, at its expense, the existing problem at the railway bridge which crosses over the A5 and which is struck by an HGV on average once a fortnight. The A5 partnership have estimated each bridge strike has a 20 million cost to the local economy, so about £500 million each year, and is a major source of delay and congestion for Nuneaton communities and businesses and other users of the A5. So in addition, the development will deliver improvements at Dodwell's roundabout, including new foot and cycle crossings over the A5. And the applicant has identified a safeguarded no-build zone, which would be transferred to National Highways to help deliver future dualling of the A5 should a scheme ever be confirmed. That's a direct and positive response to the long-standing aspirations and ongoing efforts by the A5 partnership to see improvements implemented. The significant investment in local highways infrastructure forms but one of the wider benefits of these proposals, which respond directly to the continued and significant occupier demand for new employment land. The proposed Unit 1 submitted in detail is for an existing local employer keen to remain and expand in the area. Occupier interest in the site is high, given the severe shortage of strategic sites in the area, and the site as a whole could deliver between 2,000 and 2,500 jobs. Given the site's location, these jobs would be readily accessible to residents of Nuneaton and Hinckley, with nearby bus access plus new foot and cycle links to and within the site, which is also connected to the rights-of-way network. In conclusion, this is a multi-million-pound investment in the local economy with no significant adverse environmental effects and with benefits likely to accrue to residents and communities in Nuneaton, as well as Hinckley and parts of Rugby Borough. Thank you.
Bits of clarification I'd like to ask. Councillor Hartsell.
Oh, sorry.
So in my day job, I'm a delivery driver, and where I cover is that A5 corridor. And at peak times, I know that you're on about doing works to make it easier for lorries to get through under the railway bridge. That access point for me is concerning because at peak times, I looked on my phone 20 minutes ago, and traffic is backed up beyond the next two islands. Has it been modelled to whether the new junction that you're proposing will actually help ease that backlog, or will it add to it?
Modelled, and that's been a process that's lasted for well over 12 months, working with National Highways, who are the main guardians of the A5, as you'll appreciate, as part of the strategic network, as well as the two county councils, and they are all satisfied that the effects are acceptable. The National Highways response has been to welcome the betterment we would deliver, so that the improvements to the bridge make a significant improvement generally to conditions, partly because of the improved reliability, but also that there's then less rat running or diversions of high-sided HGVs, who they're the ones who generally hit the bridge. So they can't go that way at the moment. They will be able to in the future. So the conditions have been rigorously assessed and have been accepted by the highways authorities. So we've worked really closely with all of them, and they are satisfied fully, yeah.
No clarification. Any other members' points of clarification? No. Okay. So in that case, we have then a recommendation to grant planning permission subject to the conditions as printed. So I need a proposer and a seconder. Councillor Smith propose and Councillor Markham to second. Okay. So that will now enable the debate to follow. So do I have any members at all on that? Okay. Yeah. Councillor Cape.
The gentleman, so thank you. I have got a question about the road, though, that I'm not really quite sure of. It seems that all of the improvements are going to be south of the site, so on the kind of Leicester Hinckley side. But there are currently two black spots further up the A5, which are accident black spots, people trying to get out onto the A5. How can we be sure that this volume of traffic that is going to be increased is not going to make those areas more dangerous? And has any modelling been done on that stretch of the A5, which is only a couple of miles further up? And there's no way that all the traffic is going to go out and turn right to the motorways. There is going to be an increase in volume towards Tamworth, and I haven't heard anything about what's going to happen on those junctions.
I suppose really I don't I wouldn't want to conclude that modelling has been done. I would assume it has been done. Obviously, as the agents just advised, there's been quite extensive consultation being carried out with two county highway authorities and the national highways. I think it's also important to note that the area of the development within our patch it has no infrastructure impact, so essentially this scheme could come forward without development within Nuneaton and Bedworth's administrative boundary. Obviously, we've been led by mainly the Warwickshire County Council Highway Authority in this case, but also National Highways as well, and they have no objection to the scheme. I'm not sure, Chair, can we go back to the agent to at this point, or
Yeah, I was just going to wait for you to finish, and I was going to ask Ms. Hartley.
I think it might be worthwhile.
I'm sure you are. It's putting you on the spot. But if you could sort of fill in the blanks, so that would be very helpful for us.
Absolutely spot on. I certainly wouldn't want to get technical, and I couldn't if I wanted to, Chair. You'll appreciate there are various models transport models owned by both National Highways and locally, and they've been applied, and they don't limit themselves to the very local area. They look at the wider network. So I'd be confident to say they have looked further afield. And if you're only talking about key locations only within a few miles, then with some confidence, I think we can assume they're part of the modelling that's been undertaken. Yeah.
Follow-up question, Councillor.
Because we've got, I assume it's happened, and I'm sure that the modelling's been done, where we've been impacted previously when planning permission has been given to sites that are outside of this council. There were lots of assurances made, and the net result has been an impact on the council which we've got no control over the road traffic on. And I'm just a little bit, it's just a little niggle that this is going to be a similar situation where it all sounds great now, but then after it's done, because those other areas haven't been specifically looked at, and because no road infrastructure changes have been made on those two junctions, which I'm talking about, that it will get worse, and there will be nothing that we can do about it as a council, and it will have an impact on the residents. That's my concern.
I think that's probably duly noted, Councillor. I can see a couple of councillors nodding their heads along in agreement to what you're saying. So, I mean, it is something that obviously needs to be looked at. I don't know if there's anything further that we can add to what's already been said on that. I mean, the modelling has been done by Warwickshire County Council and by Highways. So, you know, we have to, I know you can see you rolling your eyes, but, you know, we have to trust that they, are, as the experts, are able to give us sort of the best guidance on this. And hopefully the modelling is wide enough that it will look at the knock-on effects, you know, a mile or two down the road on this one. So, you know, obviously that's something you're going to have to judge for yourself in the wider context, I think, of this. Councillor Smith.
Because I think we all share concerns about the A5, but we're not here to consider transport issues, because the bit of land we own is literally a hedge and trees. So that's the bit we're considering. I want to pull it back to some important points that Councillor Troman's raised. They've obviously, as local councillors, given a bit of thought to this. I think the first two items he raised in terms of light splay, etc., I'm not sure we can do much about that. They're in the plans to be pointing down, and we've just, I don't think we can do any...
I think you're absolutely right, but I think Rugby Borough Council have said that we would be a consultee and they would happily sort of look to work with us, I believe. But Maria, you're going to say something now.
Yes, just to say, obviously Rugby Borough Council have considered this application and with a resolution to approve, and there's 51 conditions attached to that approval, and I was just skimming through them quickly, and there is a very detailed one about lighting, for example. So it's makes lots of references, but it basically says lighting should be directed away from vegetated areas, lighting should be shielded to avoid spillage onto vegetated areas, the brightness of light should be as low as legally possible, lighting should be timed to provide some dark periods, connections to areas important for foraging should contain unlit stretches, and that's just the last part of that condition. There's a whole series of sentences before that. So just to reassure you that obviously Rugby Borough Council, who have got the majority of this development, have put 51 conditions. Likewise, there's very detailed noise conditions as well in there.
I was fairly comfortable that there's nothing we could do with that, and it was covered, as you say, in the conditions. The two that in my mind were extra suggestion-wise was the planting of semi-mature trees, which would sit on our piece of land. And the other bit was the footpaths. Now, I'm not sure they sit outside of the development. I'm not sure that's anything we can condition, but it certainly is a good suggestion, because I know that area well, and it could really do with those footpaths. Is there anything at all we can put in about that?
Point in relation to semi-mature landscaping, I think it's important to recognise that the part of the landscaping enhancements, if you like, within our patch are not on top of any mounding or bunding. So they are sort of additional enhancements in relation to sort of biodiversity net gain more so than screening. So the main screening would arise from that. The mounding within Rugby's area, and then the screening, the landscaping that will go on top. So our Parks and Open Spaces officer did suggest that actually that landscaping could be better. Obviously, we need to recognise that that part is in outline form. So again, landscaping and layout aren't even for approval at this stage in any case. Hence why we contacted Rugby to ascertain whether we would have any kind of influence in terms of screening to try and mitigate the impacts from the residents from the long shoot. We won't be the decision maker, and really Rugby will be deciding that element of the application. Obviously, if we wanted to see mature trees planted on the northern side of the brook, then we potentially could request that when a reserve matters application comes in, but there'd have to be a reason. And at the moment, there is a net gain, and actually the application results in a betterment to the land within our administrative boundary as it is. So I think that's sort of the response to that one. In terms of footpaths, I know the agent worked with county to try and get a footpath from the development up to the long shoot. I think county were quite keen to get a more direct access for residents who will go, be employed potentially in the future and wanting to access the site without crossing the A5, for example. The council haven't been able to secure that. That's us. Nuneaton and Bedworth haven't been able to because we're undertaking a parks review. So we've not been able to release any land for a connection at this point. But the recommendation for layout to be secured at a later date would potentially allow the applicant further time to negotiate with the council to potentially put an access route in, and that would be a pedestrian and cycle access route potentially, subject to the status of the review that's being carried out.
And come back to them when there's more detail and reserve matters, so yeah, happy with that.
Councillor Hammersley.
As with all building sites, noise, dust, etc., this screen which they are going to be putting in to shield the view for the people along the long shoot, could I request, but then it's down to the developer, that that would be when the oversight is done for these buildings, that screen is put in first, so to give the properties along the long shoot at least a screen which may be grassed, which may be planted with trees or whatever, prior to the clanging banging of steel going up, cranes, concrete wagons, etc., rather than the development be done with all the noise and what goes with it, with cranes, and then the oversight and the screen done last. So just as a request, could that be done first? Thank you, Chair.
Councillor, just again to reassure you that within Rugby's consideration of the application, again, a fairly lengthy noise condition, but it basically said that they had the applicant team did a very comprehensive report on noise issues, which you could see from some of the diagrams on the screen. And that report actually included recommendations for any necessary acoustic mitigation measures to protect off-site residential receptors from any significant adverse impacts, and that's during construction as well as when the site is operational. So again, just to reassure you that that is covered by the noise report, because you have to ensure that those receptors are protected during construction and during the operation of the facilities as well. So it is something that has been covered.
But I'm not just meaning sheets of plywood around the site prior to the start. I mean, I'm asking, yeah. Rather than that, as you see on most construction sites that goes up, rather than just that, I would like to see, it's only, you know, I can't demand anything, but to be on the resident side of things, that I would like to see that soil screen in place.
Is it is outlined and it's not in our, that element of the scheme is not in our area, so we have to, unfortunately we have to rely on that our neighbouring authority, given that the greatest impact will be within their area, has covered all bases. And I would be very surprised if a professional noise report, in my experience, with something of this magnitude, because you do have to remember this is a big development site, would be looking at plywood screening, but that is just my opinion. It wouldn't be, you know, it wouldn't be sufficient for a development of that magnitude.
Okay, are there any other further questions? Yeah. Yeah, if you can enlighten us, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Any part, if it's of any reassurance at all. So, I don't know how much you know about the construction process, but essentially there'll be a cut and fill exercise on the site to create a flat plateau. In creating that flat plateau, we've got to move a significant amount of earth, and that earth goes in to form that bund. So I mean, clearly there's more work to refine the detail, but the strategy, the preferred strategy of the developer would be to do that early. So the bund is one of the first things that would be created because they make it through the earthworks process. So the simplest answer to your question is yes, it would be an early deliverable, and it would partly be. So it partly helps the development process, but it does provide early benefit then in terms of screening construction noise for the duration of the construction process. So that is the intention, is the simplest answer. Sorry.
Am I okay? Yep, that is what I was hoping you were going to say, because it costs money to take soil off the site. So, but for move it from A to B, okay, and make this screen, bund or whatever, that's what I wanted to hear. I didn't want to put words in his mouth though, but so thank you for the clarification.
Matter. Councillor Cape.
Again, every day is a learning day. And so with this planning application, which we were told at the start is rather strange, it's a hybrid, am I right in saying that actually we can condition and influence very little, and to paraphrase Gone with the Wind, we've got to rely on the kindness of other councils to make sure that they've done all the mitigation and conditions that will have a positive impact upon us?
I think it's more than kindness, councillor. It's legislation and policy that they have to adhere to. It's not just kindness.
That makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah, I think we've also got to remember what our scope is within this development. You know, we are a very, very small part of it. Not insignificant, but we are a small part of it. And most of what we're sort of looking at is actually going on external to our own boundaries. And again, it makes it very difficult because I appreciate we want to try and influence these things that are going to sort of, you know, lead to sort of better outcomes for our residents, particularly during the development phase of it. But we can only once again consider what falls within our own boundary. I know it's very difficult to sort of separate things out because, you know, you often look at these things holistically rather than as individual packages. But I think, you know, once again, I'm going to call upon all of the members here tonight to sort of, you know, separate that out and to just think about what's going on. I would also remind you, some of this we will come back to because some of it will, you know, come out at reserved matters. I think it's been very strongly conditioned looking at it by, you know, Rugby Council. And I think, you know, there is probably a good dialogue going on between officers. So I'm sort of fairly confident that as we move forward, you know, and issues do come along, that they can be sort of resolved at that sort of level. So I'm not going to say any more. I don't see any other speakers wishing to speak or indicated to speak. So I should go to the vote. So we have a recommendation to grant planning permission. All those in favour of granting that recommendation? Okay, so that is unanimous. So that has been approved. We don't have... Oh, no, sorry, Councillor Kate, did you have your... No, sorry. Against? Okay, abstentions. One abstention. Sorry, my apologies, Councillor. So with that in mind, there are no further matters for this council, this planning application committee to consider this evening. So I will now thank you all for attending, and I will call this meeting to a close. So if you could stop the recording, thank you very much.